Craig, start us out.
Well, I always enjoy these moments where I, Craig McConnell, am joined by Alex Burton and Morgan Snyder, and we're sitting around talking about kings. And we wanted to just turn on a mic while we were talking about it and hope that this conversation encourages and stimulates some of your own thinking here. Morgan, take it, buddy.
Thanks, Craig. So, we've been doing these podcasts over time on the decade of the 30s and what's a man's journey like in the 30s and how do we hear from God and walk with Him. And many of you probably heard from past podcasts, a big part of that for me was seeking the counsel of older men about that decade. What are the pitfalls? What should a man look for and make his life about? One of the words that surfaced from a wise man I talked about was the suggestion that the primary word that defines the 30s emotionally is frustration. He said most guys live in the 30s just feeling so frustrated. And what he suggested was that's actually not a bad thing, that they are the hidden years and they are the years of middle management. And so much of the time a man in his 30s spends and his greatest strength and his greatest struggle is largely hidden. And we feel frustrated. But the question is, what frustrates us and what do we do with that frustration? I was talking to a buddy a couple days ago, and he was just basically bitching about his life.
He was frustrated.
He was frustrated. He was talking about the guy he works for, and I realized, wow, when it's your own life, it's really hard to see. But when you've seen in another man's life, you realize, oh, that's my story too, as far as I've heard myself say those things. And he was complaining about the current guy, but I remember him complaining about his last boss, and I realized how much in the decade of the 30s young men spend serving under uninitiated kings, unvalidated kings, bad kings, selfish kings. So I want to throw that out to you guys. React to that. Is that your experience? And have you seen that of the frustration for young men serving under weak kings?
I'm not sure I'd limit it to men in their 30s. I mean,
right.
I think most people, men or women, their experience with kings has been largely negative, frustrating, disappointing, harmful, abusive. I mean, the state and the character of kings these days is such that where are the good kings? Very few of them, Morgan. So while that may be true of men in their 30s, I think it's the common experience of men and women in general.
That's what I was going to say is, I think it's an indication of a more general problem that we don't have many good kings in this world. There's not a lot of men who have received the initiation, the validation, and the experiences with God that have brought them to a place to be able to live well as a king.
And I think when we're talking about kings, to be more specific, we're talking about men in places of leadership, in places of influence or affluence, where they're meant to offer their strength and their life for the benefit of other people. That might be in a church, might be in an organization, in a family, in a business. We use the term king as metaphor. Listening to the frustration of my buddy the other day, hearing my own frustration at various times and the frustration of so many men, I realized so much energy is spent spinning our wheels, pushing against middle management, and it seems like most guys go to either resignation or revolt. And I guess what I mean by that is the resignation of, man, life just sucks, or it's a victim mentality. There's nothing I can do about this. And so there's some place in a man in the decade of the 30s that just resigns and settles, or a young man revolts and says, I can do better than that. I'm more capable than that man. And so he goes at it and starts building his own kingdom. Would you guys agree? React to those two categories of resignation or revolting under weak kings.
Yeah. those are two good categories. I'd actually add a third.
Mm-hmm.
And the third I'd add would be, as a man experiences that and lives under an unvalidated king or whatever the case may be, I think in some cases, too, it shapes what that man becomes as he enters in later into life into becoming a king. I just remember experiences I had in former positions under leaders and good men in general, but one of my bosses was a good man, but just dying for validation. And all of his life, he worked everything out to try to be as successful as possible because he had this just aching abyss for validation. And a lot of it stemmed out of his relationship with his dad. But what ended up happening with the staff under him is his need to be successful and validated in that caused him to be a very rigid, stern man. And everyone under him was just in fear of failing that. And after a while, most of the staff, the answer that they gave to that was setting up their lives to appease that. And so don't screw up and be on top of it and anticipate what he is going to want. And over time, I think that creates a way of living in the people under the king that isn't healthy either. So
Your two words, Morgan, were revolt, and what was the
resignation?
Okay,
Resignation.
Yeah. I mean, I immediately thought of book of James in chapter 4, where James basically tells us that we desire something, we don't get it. When we don't get it, we kill, murder, conflict. When you're under a king, you're expecting a number of things. If it's a bad king, abusive king, weak king, unvalidated king, life isn't very good for you.
Yes.
And I think we react to hardships, to disappointment, to frustration by, you use the word revolt. I think there's probably other words, but yeah, you're not giving me what I want, what I need. There's an anger and a rage because something is out of sync and out of line with the way it should be. So revolt, rebel, attack, gossip. I mean, you work against a bad king.
Yes.
You attack him. You want to take him down.
Yes.
Whether you can actually take him down or you just undermine him, but you're not happy. And you cannot live long in that state of being under a lousy king long without either attacking or just shutting down, just dying. It just becomes a job. You give up. Resignation would probably be a good word.
Yes. And so as you share that, Craig, I just wonder if there isn't a different perspective that a young man can bring to it to not waste that pain. I remember in an earlier conversation, John said to that is, don't waste your pain, right? And Alex, you mentioned that those things shape us. And so what would it look like for younger men to say, I'm going to let this experience shape me by allowing God to grow me under poor kingship? In other words, I'm here. This is my assignment. And rather than revolting and, like you said, Craig, in the anger of it, while God has me here, Father, what is the lesson you're bringing? What do you want to do in me? I remember Gal was telling me from an Alcoholics Anonymous class, one of the mantras was, bless you, change me. It was whatever the circumstances, bless you, change me. And I thought, boy, isn't it so true of young men? It feels like the mantra is, bless me, change you. Bless me, change you. That trying to deflect and make it all about you, where even if we are under bad kings or weak kings, still there exists this priceless opportunity to say, Father, what is it bringing up in me that's unhealed, that's not yet free, that's unvalidated, and do the soul work required so that when we are in that position of authority under those, we actually live different rather than just continue the broken patterns of those above us.
What you've hit on is a worldview or a view of life that few have, Morgan, to actually see the world in disappointing circumstances and very difficult people as the venues, the instruments God is using to deal with something with you. And from one perspective, ultimately what God's most concerned about isn't your difficult life, it's your heart, period, end of story.
Right.
That's what he's after. Now, the king may be unjust, there may be circumstances and so on and so forth you do need to deal with, but God is ultimately involved using disruptive people and circumstances to surface something in your heart he wants to deal with. Viewing life that way is really rare. It's really hard because we demand justice. We demand our world work a certain way. And we get offended by injustice rather than seeing God's hand going after something in us.
Yeah. And Morgan, I think to what you said, it requires a coming back to that question of where is my heart postured in this? Mm-hmm. Like you said, am I saying bless me and change you, or change me and bless you? There's a constant coming back to where's my heart in this? What does God have for me in this? And what is he trying to get after with me in it? I mean, it really looks like walking with God in those circumstances.
Yeah.
And it's also a great opportunity, just as we bring this to a close, to pray and say, God, where are you leading me? Are you aware of this pain? Are you aware of this need? And will you father me through it? In other words, bad kings don't last forever. They come and go, and you can only do it for so long. But while I'm here, let me not waste my pain. I invite you into this to change me, to expose the things that need to grow. In the meantime, I ask that in your timing, you would move me from under this and grow me to be a king that offers strength and selflessness and love to those around me.
Amen. This has been the Ransom Heart podcast. Thank you for joining Alex, Morgan, and myself, and hope you'll listen in, download, access next week.